Understanding more about the difference between frameworks and competencies or standards in Project One. So we've talked about this a little bit already, but I want to go into a little bit more detail and give you some guidance to help you get moving on the first part of Project One. So in the directions, there's a section that talks about leadership frameworks, and there's a section that talks about competencies or standards. If I go to the unit resources that are associated with Project One, then you get to a page where you have some information on leadership competencies, leadership self-assessment, and theories and frameworks. And I've talked about a couple of these resources already, but I want to go into a new one that I haven't talked about as much, and that's the teacher leadership self-assessment. So I've already opened that. It is an article that if you go all the way over, it is a 43-page PDF, but inside this, there's a self-assessment, and there's some directions at the top of this. There's some background information, which I recommend you read, and then there's a section on how to use a tool. And it basically says you go through and rank yourself in each of these areas as not evident, beginning, developing, or advancing. So then you just scroll down through. I wouldn't call it a rubric. It's more like a Likert scale type assessment. But you have different competencies that are part of these. Let's see what word it uses to refer to them. You have different pieces. So you have five major competencies, and then you have subdomains of those competencies. So all together, this entire rubric, this entire scoring mechanism is a framework. But each of these little sections is a competency. So in the first part of your project, you're taking the entire rubric as a whole and using it to explain more information. But in the second piece of it, if I go back to my directions, where I get to the competencies or standards, you're pulling out individual items. So you may pull 2 or 3 from this particular tool, and you may go to one of the other tools and pull 2 or 3 and tie them together in your project. But it's really going to help jumpstart your paper if you go down through this document and read each of these items and score yourself first and figure out where you're advanced and where you're not, and think of examples, because underneath it, it gives us space for evidence and next steps. So when you fill out this evidence piece, it's going to give you the information you need for the example section of both these items, for the framework and for the competencies, where it says include an example of a time in your life when you applied one or more of these leadership frameworks. So that will jumpstart you for your project. So I just wanted to go through those things. Go through that rubric and score yourself based on how you feel you do in each of those areas, and it will really help you with Project One.